Something I personally find really annoying is the assumption that an occultist only returns to the church or specifically to Christianity because they are lazy, because they couldn't hack the shadow work, because they refuse to deconstruct, or they are afraid of leaving their comfort zone, as if participating in organized religion doesn't qualify as active spiritual practice. Christianity possesses its own initiations and rituals, its seasonal traditions, its personal sacrifices, spirit work, and psycho-spiritual growth. But despite this, there's this assumption that returning to the church is somehow a cop-out. And this is always surprising to me because I grew up in the church and I always knew Christianity to be a really intensive spiritual practice. If you're doing it the way like Jesus would want you to do it, the entire practice is shadow work. Dying to your flesh, practicing humility, releasing control, resisting greed, ego check after ego check, the consistent Bible study, consistent attendance at church, even physically tithing into your spiritual community with money or charitable service. Like, that sounds pretty legit to me. And now, to be clear, I consider myself to be an eclectic oracle who doubles as a house witch. I'm an animist at heart. The Holy Spirit greets me as a raven and as a dove. But I know the church well as an initiate from birth, as a born again in my 20s, and even as a teenager who once did an interpretive dance for Christ at a military chapel. I keep a statue of Athena and Aphrodite on my altar, but I have carried my cross. And I've also been in this online modern spiritual community like long enough to see this like stinky little belief about Christianity somehow equaling avoidance time and time again. Now, to be clear, alongside capitalism and patriarchy, the institution of the church has caused innumerable horrors, the suffering which can never fully be understood. You will have no argument from me on that. But that's not where like this popular online criticism falls. It's never that spiritually nuanced. It's always almost on the validity of Christianity as a spiritual practice, and it's somehow being less in depth or less valid than a more eclectic form of spiritualism. And rarely like do these arguments consider that some people actually function best in an organized system with common guidelines and expectations. Not everyone wants a choose your own adventure type of spiritual experience, nor is it good for everyone either. Christianity might be someone's closest ancestral practice. They might genuinely be more compatible with Abrahamic spirits, with angels, than with other different types of spiritual energies or entities. They might benefit more from the in-person community that the modern church offers more than like a digital one that we all share together. They may find the principles and the practices of that religion more consistent than those of an eclectic spiritual practice. And I think it's also worth considering that the modern day church, like as an institution, would benefit from spiritually conscious and engaged women. And maybe this in some way is how meaningful revival occurs, especially for the Marys and for the Magdalens that kind of walk among us. Meanwhile, I feel like we never really take any meaningful time to discuss like the rampant issues within our own spiritual communities. One important issue, for example, is how the popular spiritual community literally can't stand one another. They find each other regressive and understudied, too puritanical and too vengeful, too superficial and also deep fake, performative and consumeristic. No one's practice is authentic enough or intersectional enough or matriarchal enough. No one has deconstructed enough. We argue over the divine feminine and which way to blow cinnamon and how to interpret our tarot cards. We jump from tarot to astrology to the sacred numerology of Egypt to alien contact to numerology and like back to our pendulums, and like we never often are even spending enough time in these practices or disciplines to really understand them at a foundational or even a functional level. And like I say that as someone who has taught tarot classes for like the better part of a decade at this point. We hex strangers on TikToks. We form covens and groups that degrade into chaos quicker than an episode of fucking Charmed. Everyone is a high priestess. everyone is an asshole. Everyone is a generational curse breaker. Everything is an Alanis Morissette song. And in general, I actually really love that about this community. I love how hungry and how curious and how eclectic this community is. They are not afraid to take the long way around, to dig for answers themselves, to fuck around, to find out, trace their steps all the way back to the starting line and begin again. It is a wild and winding way to embark on a metaphysical journey, and it's certainly not for the stupid or for the faint of heart. But there's also so many issues in this community of appropriation, of unfocused studies, lack of mentorship, peer review, infighting, hateful competition, a lack of emotional regulation, and personal responsibility to the collective or to the community, the coven, the group. And all groups have issues and blind spots in areas that we gotta refine. There's community building that's needed in every single belief system. And truthfully, no one, not the Christians or the pagans or the flying spaghetti monsters, can say with any real certainty which practice is more or less valid, which one is closer to some cosmic truth, which one is more universally helpful to society. We're all throwing spiritual spaghetti at the wall and praying that something sticks to our souls. And that's why it's so strange to me to find such a lack of nuance around Christian converts, as if the church couldn't use a little matriarchal rage of Christ's forgotten sisters. And I think in some instances we should encourage the feminization of the church and the return of the mothers who anointed the holy feet, the women at the well, and the lovers at the tomb. Do we really want to spend our time continually arguing over what is and is not the proper pronunciation of the Hecate, or are we better served by finding the real and true lanes aligned with our personal mission and our unique mysticism? Because I think when we really zoom out, we're all really working towards a similar goal, which is wholeness, revival, and power for the feminine, and the reclamation of our collective power on the pulpit, in the public, and at the polls. And I think it's just so easy to forget how weird and winding and fluid our spiritual journeys can be, how often they are subject to change, and how normal that is. We lose grace for each other so quickly, forgetting how many times we cried at our own altars of confusion before we once again found our way.